All right, let's dive into this whole self-sabotage thing. You sent over those parts from Brianna Wiest's book, The Mountain Is You, and they were really interesting.
Yeah, what's really cool about her book is that she doesn't just define self-sabotage. She digs into those reasons why we actually do it. It's like she's giving us this behind-the-scenes peek at how we, without even knowing it, prevent ourselves from, really being happy and successful.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're aiming for today. We're going to pull out the most important ideas from those sections you gave us and really lay out how this self-sabotage plays out in everyone's lives, and then, give you some real strategies to stop it.
Yeah, and Wiest's main point is that self-sabotage really stems from needs that we haven't met. We all have these needs deep down, but instead of, confronting them directly, we tend to resist, and that resistance can lead us to develop some not so healthy coping mechanisms.
So kind of like ignoring that check engine light and just hoping the car keeps running.
Well, that's a great analogy. Wiest actually uses a story from Carl Jung's childhood. When Jung was young, he fell and hit his head at school. And while most kids would be, worried about the injury, Jung's first thought was great, now I don't have to go back to school. He didn't enjoy school. He felt out of place. And soon after, he started having these fainting spells that no one could explain.
It's almost as if his mind was trying to find a way out of that situation.
Exactly. And later on in life, Jung realized those fainting spells were his subconscious desire to avoid school. It was actually manifesting physically. It's really interesting.
So it's like his self-sabotage, the fainting spells, became his way to cope with disliking school.
Exactly. And it really emphasizes this point that Wiest makes, that self-sabotage often comes from irrational fears and limiting beliefs that we've developed over time. And these beliefs can become so deeply ingrained that we don't even realize they're shaping our behavior.
It's like an invisible force holding you back. Now, Wiest also discusses Gay Hendricks' concept of an upper limit, the idea that we all have a set capacity for happiness.
Yeah, and this concept suggests that we're sort of wired to stick with what feels familiar, even if it's negative. When our happiness or our success goes beyond that comfort zone, beyond our upper limit, we subconsciously retreat back to that familiar territory, even if it means, sabotaging ourselves.
So how can we start to recognize this self-sabotage in our own lives? What are some signs we should be looking out for?
Wiest outlines a few key indicators. The first is denial, where you just avoid facing the truth about your situation. There's also prioritizing external validation, so what other people think, over your own genuine happiness. And then there's the fear of actually dealing with difficult emotions, feeling overwhelmed because you're trying to do everything all at once. And lastly, waiting for things to magically change instead of taking any action yourself.
That's quite a list. So let's say you've recognized some of these signs in yourself. What's the next step? How do you actually break free?
Well, Wiest really highlights the importance of understanding your core commitments and your needs. Your core commitments, those are your primary objectives, is what you're striving for, often unconsciously.
Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Sure. Let's say someone has a core commitment to always being in control. That might be driven by a deeper need for trust. The less they feel like they can trust others or trust situations, the more they'll try to control everything around them.
So it becomes a cycle.
It can. But recognizing that core commitment is that first step. Once you identify it, you can start to uncover that core need driving it. Maybe a commitment to freedom comes from a need for autonomy.
And understanding those core needs is essential to break free from self-sabotage.
Absolutely.
But
because then you can finally address those needs directly, instead of relying on those unhealthy coping mechanisms.
now this is where things start to get really interesting. Wiest points out that just recognizing the root of your self-sabotage is only the beginning. You have to actually take action, even when it feels uncomfortable. So what might that look like?
It could be reconnecting with your vision for your life, that big picture goal that truly inspires you. Having a clear why can be so motivating. It can help you push through the discomfort.
So instead of focusing on what you don't want, you shift your focus to what you do want.
Exactly. It's also crucial to allow space for those difficult emotions. Don't try to suppress them. Let yourself actually feel them, acknowledge them, and process them in a healthy way.
I really like how Wiest suggests writing letters to your past or future self as a way to process and release those emotions.
Yeah, it can be a really surprisingly powerful technique. By putting those emotions on paper, you gain this fresh perspective on them, and it can help you start letting go of those old patterns.
But what about those times when you just don't feel like taking action? Like, you know what you need to do,
Yeah.
but the motivation just isn't there.
Yeah, that's a common struggle. And Wiest addresses this directly with the idea of separating action from feeling. Our feelings often prioritize comfort and familiarity, which is why we tend to wait until we feel like it before doing something. But the real key is to act before you feel like it.
So you're saying we need to overcome that initial resistance and just do it.
Exactly. Action creates momentum. The more you act in alignment with your goals, the more motivated you'll become.
It's like that saying, motivation follows action.
Exactly. Another powerful shift that Wiest suggests is to reinterpret those negative emotions. Instead of seeing them as the enemy, try to see them as valuable messengers.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think of negative emotions as insights into your needs. They can highlight areas where you might need to grow. Like, for example, feeling guilty could suggest that you're not living in alignment with your values, while resentment might point to unmet needs in a relationship.
So instead of pushing those negative emotions away, you learn to understand what they're trying to tell you.
Exactly. And that can lead to some really profound changes in how you approach life.
Wiest actually goes deeper into specific emotions like guilt, embarrassment, resentment, regret, fear, and anger. She explains how each one can point towards certain needs you haven't met or areas that you can work on. It's like she's giving you a guide to understanding your emotions. Now, what about intuition? How does that play into all of this?
Wiest has some interesting thoughts on gut feelings. She makes it clear that your gut is a powerful tool in the present moment. It helps you assess those situations, the people around you. It's in real time. But when you project your fears or past experiences onto the future, you can confuse instinct with anxiety.
So how can you tell the difference between a genuine gut feeling and just anxiety?
Well, Wiest highlights this key difference. Intuitive thoughts, they feel grounded and peaceful, while anxiety-driven, invasive thoughts tend to create panic, and they make you feel closed off.
Wow, this is already so insightful, but it feels like a lot to take in. Where do we even start applying all of this in our lives? Well, Wiest really emphasizes the importance of true self-care. And it's more than just bubble baths and face masks. It's about actually building your emotional intelligence so you can understand and manage your emotions more effectively.
So it's more about mastering your inner world instead of just distracting yourself from it.
Exactly. It takes time and practice, but the rewards are immeasurable.
This has already been an incredible deep dive. We've learned about how those unmet needs can lead to self-sabotage, the importance of understanding our core commitments, and how to change our perspective on those negative emotions. What else does Wiest have in store for us?
Well, in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore Wiest's insights on our neurological wiring, the power of those small changes, and how to actually deal with the discomfort of positive change. We'll also touch on how anxiety can stem from what she calls logical lapses in our thinking.
It sounds like we're about to unlock even more secrets of the mind. I can't wait to continue this exploration. See you in part 2. Welcome back. Let's keep going with Brianna Wiest's The Mountain Is You, and really look at how your brain sometimes plays a part in this whole self-sabotage thing.
Right. At the end of the last part, you mentioned this homeostatic impulse. What exactly is that, and how does it relate to, holding ourselves back?
Like your brain's thermostat. It wants to keep things just as they are. Even if your current state isn't really helping you, your brain really craves that familiarity, even if it's negative or uncomfortable.
So even when you know you need to make a change, your brain's kind of fighting to keep you stuck.
Exactly. That's why making positive changes can feel so, unsettling at first. You're basically going against your brain's natural wiring.
It's like our brains get addicted to the status quo, even if it's not making us happy.
Yeah, and Wiest challenges this whole idea that we need some massive breakthrough to change. She believes that real lasting change comes from those consistent small adjustments. She calls them micro shifts.
So instead of waiting for this, big epiphany, we should be focusing on just small tweaks to our daily habits and behaviors.
Exactly. And those small changes over time, they can lead to some pretty amazing results. It's like compound interest for self-improvement. Do you see how this might apply to your own life?
Oh, definitely. I'm starting to see how powerful those small changes can be. But even when you make those positive changes, it doesn't always feel good right away, right? Why is that?
Well, that's where this idea of adjustment shock comes in. Even positive changes can bring stress and discomfort. It goes back to that craving for familiarity. When you change things up, even in a good way, your brain kind of freaks out a little.
Like it's saying, wait, hold on, this isn't how we usually do things.
Exactly. But remember, that discomfort, that adjustment shock, it's actually a sign that you're growing. You're stepping outside that comfort zone, expanding what you're capable of.
So when you feel that resistance, that discomfort, it's actually a good thing.
It can be.
Yeah.
And this all connects to what Wiest says about embracing imperfection. We can get so caught up in trying to be perfect that we're actually frozen by fear. But imperfection is crucial for learning and evolving.
Perfection is the enemy of progress, right?
Absolutely. You have to allow yourself to make mistakes. That's how you learn and grow.
Now, Wiest also talks about these logical lapses, which she links to anxiety. So what are these logical lapses, and how do they contribute to feeling overwhelmed?
A logical lapse is when you just fixate on that worst case scenario and you don't even consider the whole picture. You jump to conclusions based on fear or past experiences, and you spiral into anxiety without even thinking about other possibilities.
Like looking at a situation through a distorted lens, only seeing the negative.
Exactly. And it can leave you feeling so out of control because you've convinced yourself that the worst is going to happen, but you haven't even thought about what you'd do if it did.
So how can you, overcome these logical lapses and actually feel more in control?
Wiest says to develop those logical thinking skills. Take a step back. Look at this situation realistically. Don't just let your emotions run the show. Train yourself to look at the facts. Consider all those different perspectives and come up with a plan.
So it's about using logic along with those emotional responses.
Exactly. Become more aware of your thoughts and challenge the ones based on irrational fears.
This reminds me of what we talked about earlier, that emotional intelligence.
Yeah, it's all connected. The more you understand your emotions and how to manage them, the better you'll be at spotting those logical lapses, reframing negative thoughts, and making good choices.
It can be so hard to let go of those painful experiences, the ones that have really, shaped you.
Yeah, you carry those emotional scars.
So how can we start to release those old experiences and move on?
Wiest has this really powerful visualization exercise. Imagine your current self offering support and guidance to your past self. During those tough times, you're tapping into the wisdom you've gained since then and offering compassion to that younger you.
It's like rewriting the story of your past.
Yeah. Acknowledge that pain, but also recognize how much you've grown and changed. You're not that same person anymore. And then Wiest introduces this idea of connecting with your highest potential future self.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does that involve?
It's another visualization technique. You connect with this ideal future version of yourself. Imagine the most fulfilled, accomplished, joyful you. Create a mental picture and have a conversation with them.
Wow. So you're talking to the wisest, most evolved version of yourself. What kind of questions would you ask?
Ask specific questions about your path, your challenges, what advice they would give you. Tap into that wisdom of your future self, the one who's already overcome those hurdles and achieved that success you're working towards.
I love that. It's like combining visualization with goal setting. It's not just dreaming about the future. You're getting insights from that future self. This is powerful stuff. But honestly, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with all this. It's a lot to take in.
Oh, it's completely understandable. We've covered a lot of ground, and there's still more to explore.
Okay, so where do we go from here? How do we start using all of this in our lives?
That's exactly what we'll be uncovering in the last part of our deep dive. We're going to delve into Wiest's insights on embracing your true self, building that mental strength, and finding inner peace. And finally, we'll talk about how to actually live a life you enjoy.
Sounds like the perfect way to wrap up this deep dive. I can't wait. So we've really gotten into the how self-sabotage works, and now I'm really interested in that healing part and how we can create a life we actually enjoy. Where do we even start with all that?
Well, In the Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest talks about embracing your authentic self. It's like true healing isn't about going back to who you were before, but about really owning who you've become through all your experiences. It's showing up as you are, imperfections and all amise.
So instead of erasing the past, we should be integrating it.
Yeah, because even those tough times, those painful experiences, they've taught you something. They've made you stronger, more resilient. And when you fully accept yourself, flaws and all, you're free from needing that validation from others.
That's a powerful thought. What about building mental strength? How does that fit in?
Wiest has a really cool take on mental strength. It's not about just shutting down your emotions. It's about learning to process and manage them.
So not being stoic, but learning to handle those emotions.
Exactly. And she gives some practical tips. Create plans for things that make you anxious. Practice humility. Remember, the world doesn't revolve around you. Be okay with not knowing everything and ask for help when you need it. and challenge those all or nothing thoughts.
So it's about having a balanced view instead of getting stuck in extremes.
Right. And instead of just dwelling on mistakes, focus on solutions. Move forward. Do you ever find yourself doing that?
Oh, definitely. It's so much more empowering to focus on solutions. Now, Wiest also talks about inner peace, and I have to admit that feels hard to find sometimes.
Yeah, it's not about reaching some perfect happiness, but about feeling okay no matter what's going on around you. Wiest suggests some things, like detaching from worry, through mindfulness, being present, setting goals that match your values, and reconnecting with your inner child.
That reconnecting part really resonates with me. It's about taking care of that part of us that still needs love and support.
Yeah, it's powerful. And remember, you don't just find inner peace, you build it day by day.
It's easy to forget that in all the chaos of life. Now, Wiest also talks about living a life you enjoy. Seems simple, but so many of us struggle with it.
She points out a few reasons for that. Some people get caught in those power struggles in relationships, instead of focusing on connecting genuinely. Some surround themselves with people who drain their energy, instead of having those supportive, positive people around. And lots of people spend their time and energy on things that don't bring them joy.
So it's about really choosing a life that brings you joy, instead of just going with what everyone expects.
Yeah, creating a life that's true to you, matches your values, not trying to fit into a box that doesn't feel right. How about you? Do you feel like you're living that kind of life? What could you change to bring in more joy?
That's a great question to think about. This has been an incredible deep dive. We've learned so much about self-sabotage and how to build a more fulfilling life. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Think of this. What if your self-sabotage is actually a message from your inner self? What's it trying to tell you? What can you do today to listen to that message?
That's a really powerful way to look at it. It's a reminder that even those destructive behaviors can be chances to grow if we're willing to listen. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into self-sabotage. We hope you've learned something valuable and that you feel ready to keep exploring this journey. Remember, overcoming self-sabotage is an act of self-love, and the rewards are amazing.